Yes, I am Jaime Romany here to present on the experiences implementing ecosystem-based adaptation in the Caribbean. Okay, I don't know why it's not. Okay. So firstly, we have been speaking about ecosystem-based adaptation. What is ecosystem-based adaptation, or EBA? EBA solutions can be understood as the intersection that connects several approaches to addressing climate change adaptation, biodiversity and ecosystem conservation, and socioeconomic development, particularly of vulnerable communities. It is the opposite of business as usual. They create strong links between ecosystem conservation approaches and sustainable socioeconomic development. In other words, people are at the center of this approach. I'm hearing a lot of noise in the background. I don't know if that person can be muted. In the Caribbean region, a history of bad farming practices in upland areas contribute to land degradation. The exposure of land to extreme weather events caused by climate change increases soil erosion, land slippage, and poor soil water management. The cost of many climate change adaptation measures is frequently beyond the means of national governments. This is the case especially for hard or gray engineering approaches, where retaining walls and gabion baskets are the traditional options. Green engineering is the use of live plants to add structural strength to soil, and it is most often a less expensive option. In this presentation, I am going to focus on the use of the vetiver plant. This slide generally illustrates green engineering in action. In this case, a hillside is exposed to rain. Luckily, green engineering measures are in place to alleviate the potential loss of soil, land slippage, and rapid runoff of water on the slopes. In this case, vetiver, which is planted in hedgerows, act as a natural barrier and measurably slows down the velocity of slope runoff. Vetiver as a green engineering tool. Vetiver is used as a green engineering tool due to the characteristics of its fast-growing, dense, fibrous root structure, which grows vertically and anchors itself deep into the soil, reducing the shear movement of the slope. In this illustration, if these vetiver plants were not present, the land would be vulnerable to a landslip along the dotted lines. Notice that these roots can grow up to 10 feet deep in the first 2 years. Vetiver is a bunch grass and grows in clumps, multiplying up to 150 plants within 1 year of planting. In this way, it forms dense barriers with the ability to slow down the movement of water on slopes. This cross-section shows how runoff is slowed down by the dense vetiver clump, which belongs to a hedgerow. In doing so, the soil particles are slowed down enough to be deposited by the barrier, which would be behind the dense vetiver clump. In time, this deposition of soil behind the clump can act as a safe pathway for farmers to walk on the hillside farms. Let us look at its use in soil water management. Vetiver is a phytoremediator. In other words, it has the ability to remove bad stuff like heavy metals and extra nutrients from soil. It is a C4 plant, and it does not compete with food crop plants for water. It is water and photosynthetic efficient, absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and fixes carbon to the soil. And we all know carbon is very important for good soil health. Vetiver also brings water deeper into the soil, replenishing the water table. These pictures illustrate how vetiver is used in both land and water to improve water quality. For those who still use latrines, it is useful in taking up extra nutrients such as phosphates and nitrates, as well as moving water further into the soil. This is the right, sorry, right. This is a really good cross-section showing how water, which is slowed down by the hedgerow, now has the time to move vertically into the soil and replenish the water table. My slide isn't moving. Okay. Though it can act like a retaining wall on its own due to its dense fibrous root structure, vetiver can be used to complement traditional gray engineering methods that we use here in the Caribbean. They can be placed higher up from gabion baskets to add more protection from the velocity of runoff, and they can be used to support retaining walls, which may be failing due to undercutting or other factors. On its own, it is a cost-effective tool with an estimated savings up to 80% of the cost of gray engineering structures with the same function. A bonus of vetiver is that its seeds are not viable, making the plant non-invasive. In other words, it will not grow where it is not wanted. And these plants also grow well in our climate and geographical conditions. To recap, vetiver is used as a green engineering tool to address the issues of soil erosion, landslips, and poor soil water management. Its deep fibrous roots, large clump structure, and phytoremediation property make it a natural alternative to other expensive traditional gray engineering practices that we use to alleviate the effects of climate change. In many countries I've seen in the region, I've come across the different names of vetiver. Course I know is used in India, vetiver in Trinidad, and bedding grass. Sweet root, I think, is used in Grenada. So in your country, if you have any local or whatever other names you know vetiver as, it would be really great if you could put it in our chats so I can have more reference to it. Okay, like any engineering tool, there is a process that needs to be followed for that tool to work as intended and serve its purpose. For instance, if we build a wall but leave out steel reinforcement or use a bad concrete mixture, that wall will fail. The effective use of vetiver grass as a green engineering tool is known as the vetiver system. Let us take a closer look at the process flow for the vetiver system. First, planning and designing. A comprehensive assessment of the proposed site needs to be done. Here are some questions to be considered. What is the issue? How extensive is the issue? How many vetiver plants would you need? In the case of farming, do you have the space for these plants together with your crops? What are your vulnerabilities? Do you experience drought or flooding? Soil testing, availability of water, access to the location, your climate, for instance, will be factors in figuring out the cost of extra equipment, soil amendments, irrigation systems are needed for the plants to be properly installed and established. The first very important point I need to make here is that plants should never be sourced from a vulnerable location. For example, we will not remove a vetiver plant from the hillside. This defeats the whole purpose of the vetiver system. So the first step would be to remove a clump, cutting a few inches into the roots. Remember, it will be near impossible to fully remove this plant due to its deep fibrous roots. The leaves are then cut to 10 centimeters in length and the roots trimmed to 5 centimeters. The prepared plants or slips are then placed in water which should be changed at least once daily to stimulate root growth. After 3 to 4 days, you are now ready to plant vetiver hedgerows. As with most crops, the land is prepared by trimming vegetation just in the general area. It is not necessary to expose the bare soil, a practice which increases the chance of soil erosion and evaporation. Keep in mind that vetiver does not grow well in shade, so avoid areas under large trees. If you are going to plant on slopes, you will need to contour. This is done using an A-frame. It is important that the vetiver hedgerows have a level orientation in order to slow down the movement of water, which is the principle behind the vetiver system. Your plants should be spaced 10 to 12 centimeters apart on contour. This provides enough space for the optimal girth of the mature vetiver clump to reduce the speed of runoff. We now look at a couple incorrect installations of the vetiver system. Here are 2 examples where the spacing of vetiver was not optimal and led to further erosion. In the Brian Lara Stadium in Trinidad, they were planted in a diamond formation. You can clearly see soil behind the clumps, but the velocity of water continued at its normal rate and eroded around the plants. At a water treatment plant in St. Lucia, this also occurred, but this further went on to cause slope failure at the facility. In order to fully carry out its function and be well established, like other plants, vetiver grass needs to be happy. To be happy, they should be watered every day for the first 3 weeks. So it is advised that they are planted in the rainy season to save on cost. Weeds should be cleared within 1 foot on either side of the hedgerow to remove competition for nutrients and sunlight, and the grass chopped back at least once per year. These cuttings can be placed right behind the hedgerows to build biomass or used as mulch in other crops. To recap now, when using vetiver as a green engineering tool for climate action, a system needs to be followed for its benefits to be realized. It is not just about planting grass. Its location must be assessed. Plants should be responsibly sourced. There are steps in plant, land, preparation, spacing, and maintenance, which are also critical. The vetiver system has been used in a regional EBA project in Antigua, Dominica, St. Lucia, and Tobago. Because of its deep root system, vetiver was used in Dominica, St. Lucia, and Tobago to provide erosion control and slope stabilization in hillside communities. In Antigua, which has a much gentler topography, vetiver's roles in phytoremediation as well as slope stabilization were applied to Cook's landfill. I am now going to invite Mr. Kent Coppell, National Specialist, Eco-Dominica, to talk about how vetiver was received as a prescribed method and what are the lessons learned. Kent?
Good morning. Thanks again. I will just share a quick background to give a sort of scope in terms of the work done in Dominica, and then to go on to elaborate on some of the interventions through the project as it relates to the use of the vetiver grass. For those of you that are on the call that probably know Dominica, we're working in the eastern coast, and we worked with two main communities, Petit Soufrière and San Sauvé. And the reason why we selected those communities because of their high vulnerabilities in terms of erosion, as well as Jimmy indicated, the project had a scope dealing with the upland and coastal, the coastal impact based on upland activities. So both communities certainly provide that kind of landscape. We could see exactly what the project was seeking to address in that particular community. Now, I also want to indicate that Vective, while it's not new to Dominica, the two communities that we are speaking of do not have a history of using Vective in any large way. We have seen the use of Vective further up in the Northeast, in the Kalinago territory, and some of the other communities on the Northeast coast. Now, we introduced Vective in a number of areas, and I would like to just touch on some of the areas. We looked at Vective as a remedial action or remedial approach along the roadways, especially in newly cut roads where a lot of the soil or the slopes were exposed, and there was Vective planted along those slopes, and we have seen some positive impact of the use of the grass. In the past, quite a few of the ornamental crops or what we call use of things like croton, we use croton to stabilize some of the slopes, and we saw that some of these actions, we would see some erosion still taking place because of the distance the crotons would be planted, the distance from each other. But if the use of the inclusion of the vetiver is certainly one that reduced in terms of the soil being moved into the drains and blockage of the drains, as well as holding the land in the case of the roads, the roadsides. We also use it in new housing development areas where they had quite a bit of movement of soil and backfilling. So the grass was used along the borders, again, to help stabilize some of the slopes that would have been created based on the backfill. And very importantly, in terms of some of the main sites, we inserted or we integrated Vective into the whole farming system. And as you're aware, in those communities, we have farmers operating on small scales in their backyards in some cases, and also to integrate, they have a more integrated cropping system where they would have things like the bay and other roots and tubers and so on. And in some cases, they're planting on very, very steep slopes. So we have now introduced vetiver as part of the farming system, and we planted it in based on the guidance provided by the IA movement to help reduce erosion. But what was important is we sort of taught the farmers the use of the vetiver not only in the whole stabilization, but the use of the vetiver in the livelihood aspects in terms of the grain business, using the grass, not only for its roots purpose, but also for the leaves, where the leaves can be used as a mulch, as well as to use the leaves in the whole craft industry. So we promote the green business around the vetiver. So that is something that we saw as a positive coming up from a discussion with some of the farmers. We have trained quite a bit of the farmers in, well, especially the women in terms of the craft, as well as the other use of vetiver. We also worked a little outside the community, working with a site at Sylvania. And the reason again is because we wanted to promote the use of vetiver and slope stabilization, but more so to complement other forms of engineering as it relates to land stabilization. We know in the history of Dominica, we have been using the gabion baskets in terms of slope stabilization, but in itself cannot really control, you cannot have the gabion basket throughout the slopes. So that's an advantage of the vetiver that can be spaced at different distance along the slopes to help hold the soil. And we can, again, complement other form of engineering. And the vetiver seems to be very effective. And we do have that as a demonstration site, or we build into that demonstration site the use of the vetiver. So basically, these are the experiences that we have been exposed to in terms of use of the vetiver. And we're hoping to transfer some of these techniques into other neighboring communities. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Ken, for the insights on how you use the vetiver system in Dominica. So we're now going to ask Mr. Craig Thomas, National Specialist of ECA and Antigua Barbuda, to give us an insight on the application, which is papers again. At Cook's landfill and Antigua's lessons learned. Ken, sorry, Craig.
Okay, good morning, everybody from sunny Antigua. Similar to my colleague, Kenton Dominica, I'll give a little background into the project and our experiences in Antigua and Barbuda. But I would like persons to take note of my background, and that background basically is the location of where we are implementing the activity. That is the area called Hanson's Bay, and that is the largest mangrove swamp in Antigua and Barbuda. And so the implementation site is actually at the base of this bay, which is adjacent to the old Cook's landfill, which is a sanitary landfill. The vetiver grass is not a grass that is invasive to Antigua and Barbuda. It basically has been growing in Antigua and Barbuda. However, due to the expansion of our residential area, the areas which occupied the vetiver grass would have been now used for housing. So presently, we don't have that large area of vetiver grass present in Antigua and Barbuda. So when this project basically arose, we were able to source the vetiver grass, 6,500 slips from Dominica. Again, sourcing those slips from Dominica, we actually followed all the phytosanitary rules and regulation, where Dominica and Antigua and Barbuda, Ministry of Agriculture, played a huge role for the transfer of those slips to Antigua. As I said before, the implementation site is located at the old sanitary landfill, which is known as the Cook's landfill for those persons who are from Antigua. And that area would have posed a number of challenges which we would have experienced during the implementation phase. We started to implement the project at that area in October of last year, during which that is the time where you will have heavy rainfalls. So we had heavy rainfalls during the month of October, the month of November. And so we would have planted over 5,000 slips of vetiver grass. And so for those persons who know Antigua, we are considered one of the driest country in the region. So when it got to around January of 2022, we experienced some prolonged droughts. So what you're seeing here in some of the photos where you see drip irrigation systems set up, water harvesting catchments set up, these were not originally a part of the plan, because we were of the opinion that we could have planted these plants down at the implementation site and have them grow in this environment. And it's a lesson learned for us that not talking about vetiver grass, but plants in general, this is something that we're going to have to take into consideration whenever you're going to establish any sort of planting in a particular area. We have to take into consideration the climate change that usually affect the country. So what we would have done through our partners with CARDI and the Ministry of Agriculture, we were able to design a gravity feed drip irrigation system using 1,000-gallon tanks, where we divided up the space. So we had 3,000 feet of vetiver grass in 3 rows, and we divided up each row into 300 to 400 feet to facilitate the drip irrigation system. One of the lessons learned that we gathered from this project is that the planting of the vetiver grass, or grasses in general, the root system, or the root system in terms of how you go about planting these plants, it's something that we learned, where we had to consider planting these plants in bags mixing the soil with the soil from the landfill with soils from where we have the nurseries, so that the plants can establish a good root system before we would transfer them. Because this area is an area that is high in saline, has a high saline content, and with that you have a lot of leachate of toxic chemicals coming from the old landfill, which basically posed a problem. So with implementation of the drip irrigation system and establishing plants, transferring plants with established root system to the site, assisted the project in a good way. One of the photos that you also see in here is a photo where there was some inundation of the plants that were previously planted in October. The area in Hudson Bay, whenever there is high rainfall, the mangrove would basically come close to the Cook's landfill. So again, that basically taught us a lesson where we had to change some of the design in terms of how we're going to plant and where we're going to plant. And from recent photos from areas that now are that has a lot of water because it has been raining in Antigua, but in Antigua for the last couple of weeks. But those plants, now that they have established, the high saline water from Hudson Bay is not affecting those plants. So these are some of the things that we need to consider whenever we are going to establish any sort of introduction of any plants, whether fruit trees, grasses, any sort of plant. These are some of the things that you have to take into consideration. The climate conditions during the dry period and also during the wet period. And I said we would have learned that because of the location of where we were, the introduction of a drip irrigation system would have saved this project somewhat. And the plants, now that they've been there for a year, have now established them and have now adapted. And I think this is one of the objectives of the project, is to have an adaptation approach to introduction of these plants in this particular area. Similar to my colleague Kent, there's a green business component in this project. And to date, you have persons in Antigua and Barbuda who would have learned through training from facilitators from Trinidad how they can basically utilize or add value to the vetiver grass. And you have persons here making soaps, craft materials, beverages. When I say beverages, wines, oils, and persons are also utilizing the vetiver grass as a landscaping mechanism, especially if you live on slope area. So we in Antigua are making use of the vetiver grass, similar to making use of other plants that we can adapt so that we can actually add value and basically make a business out of it. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Craig, and I hope that you can send some sun for us here in Trinidad. You know, this definitely gives us so much to think about when trying to implement green engineering using vetiver. So before I go on to talk about experiences in Tobago, I must mention we did have a specialist from St. Lucia with us today. But I must mention that there are sometimes local stigma against vetiver. The case in St. Lucia is that vetiver is thought to attract snakes. There were instances where hedgerows had to be removed because a neighbor felt unsafe, and with the grass being nearby. So local culture is another factor to consider when installing the vetiver system, when assessing and deciding to move on. I don't know why this screen is okay. So we now move on to Tobago. In Tobago, the vetiver system was used in the hillside community of Charlottesville and in farmlands in Bloody Bay. One of the main steps that was not carefully followed was in the suitability of a site. Although the community saw the importance of having vetiver planted close to their homes in Charlottesville, the team who implemented it did not consider that most of the residential areas there were shaded by large trees. The plants spent most of their energy trying to get sunlight and grew very thin and tall. Without the proper development of its leaves, the plants were also not able to develop roots and multiply. Many plants survived, but could not serve their purpose as a green engineering tool. In most areas, plants were left unattended and unmaintained after planting. Dealing with dry conditions and an overgrowth of weeds around it during the rainy season also left the plants undeveloped, and the expected growth was not observed. This is being rectified now, and we look forward to seeing the vetiver system in action in Tobago very soon. In October 2021, close to 5,000 plants were installed along the Bloody Bay River bank. This was done to protect the loss of soil in farmlands there. However, a couple of weeks after, there was an intense rainfall event, and 80% of the plants were lost from landslips along the riverbank. This is in line with the importance of considering the vulnerability of a site when designing a vetiver system. Lastly, knowledge sharing through the posting of signage is also really important when installing in a public space. Maintenance workers have the tendency to get rid of anything green, especially grass. So in Tobago, many hedgerows were lost due to a disconnect in communication about the purpose of vetiver and its maintenance. So I now move on to some applications of the vetiver system. These pictures show how the vetiver system is applied in residential areas to provide slope stabilization, which is threatening infrastructure. Larger installations were done in a commercial area to prevent soil erosion and to help control some flooding that happened in that area as well. The application of vetiver system was successfully used in quarry rehabilitation in Trinidad and in St. Lucia by adding biomass and preventing soil erosion. All right, application in agriculture. In Trinidad hillside farms, the vetiver system has been well integrated with crops by providing land stabilization and soil erosion control. As Kent would have mentioned, the farmers need to understand the importance of integrating a system to prevent loss of land. Without it, they will not be able to grow their crops in any case. So these pictures show the hedgerows actually preventing further landslips and also used with seasonings that are grown in Paramin. Here we see its use in farming by providing a raw material to use as mulch, with the benefits of adding ground cover for weed control, erosion control, and soil water control, and also adding extra biomass and nutrients which are beneficial to crops. Because vetiver has the ability to draw water to its deep, dense roots, it is used in companion planting with other crops to provide some moisture around the roots of those important crops. So they're planted in circles around the food crop. So to recap, the vetiver plant is very versatile, and its leaves, roots, and dense growth characteristics make it a preferred choice as a green engineering tool. Earlier, I mentioned that EVA is people-centric and that it provides some sort of socioeconomic benefits. We also heard from Antigua and Dominica on the green business opportunities. So let's look now further into how vetiver is used in green business. For climate action to be sustainable, there should be a link between green engineering and green business. This was done regionally through capacity building on vetiver handicraft, in addition to the vetiver system, which was previously described. The picture shows the various ways in which people can earn an income through vetiver handicraft and other applications, such as roof thatching and essential oil production. how, looking at how the vetiver leaves are generally used in handicraft. So these graphics show how the vetiver grass can be harvested. Remember, at this stage, it can be prepared to, it can be used as mulch, either as long leaves or cut into smaller pieces to fit its application. After the leaves are dried, it is plaited into long vetiver ropes and then weaved by the crafters to make many products such as fashion accessories, handbags, and to upcycle old furniture like chairs, tables, and lamps. You know, it's very diverse in its application. Now we look at the use of its roots to make money. Vetiver roots can be dug up as deep as possible, though this process can be very tedious. Remember again, not to remove these roots in any vulnerable areas. The roots are washed, dried, and tied in bundles and placed in clothing drawers and food cupboards because it acts as a repellent for undesired insects and it has a sweet, earthy aroma. That's why it's used it is very popularly used as essential oils. So essential oils are produced through steam distillation, and it's an ingredient in many perfumes and can be used to make vetiver soaps, which is very popular with some of the countries such as Antigua. The diverse use of the vetiver plant has created many avenues for green business development. An example is the development of a brand, House of Vetiver, in Trinidad, which gives crafters a means of having their items marketed and sold. And as individuals, the creativity of crafters give rise to many biodegradable items that are sought after in times where there are efforts in innovative and recycle, reuse-oriented product development and solutions with low carbon footprint, which are needed to decrease the effects of global warming. The use of how do we make money now from green engineering services? There are many economic opportunities from the sourcing of plants, from nurseries, the preparation of plants, and of course, from providing the vetiver system as a service. And we must also acknowledge the opportunity to make money from the sale of mulch, which is created from the non-invasive vetiver grass, which is a valuable commodity for farmers. So I conclude, the engineering works in various disciplines are necessary to improve our lifestyle. Green engineering, which focuses on more natural ecosystem services for climate action, can be sustainable. I refer again to the sustainable development diagram with EBA at the center, and with vetiver at the center as an EBA tool, providing climate change adaptation, biodiversity and ecosystem conservation, as well as socioeconomic benefits to people. Thank you.